Standards Framework webinar in elementary mathematics. And as you can see, this webinar is being recorded and we will begin at 3:30. So welcome, and please feel free to make use of this time to introduce yourself in the chat. All right, so it is now 3:30, so I wanted to welcome you again to our webinar today, which is actually the fourth in a series on the Nevada Department of Education's ELD Standards Framework. In particular, today, I'm very excited to be able to welcome you to a webinar that will be focused on what does that framework look like in elementary mathematics. And so as we get started, I wanted to go over with you some Zoom protocol points that I'm sure you're familiar with by now, but is worth mentioning again. So you have been muted upon entering the room, and we will keep you on mute. We do, however, ask you to participate as much as possible through the chat, where we will be actively monitoring your questions, comments, concerns, and other ideas. And so that's the main channel through which we'll be able to ask our fabulous presenter today questions and elaborations upon what we have to say. So my name is Haiwen Chu, and I work as part of the Region 15 Comprehensive Center, which is one of 19 federally funded regional comprehensive centers. And there's also one national center. And the purpose of these centers is to partner with state education agencies like the Nevada Department of Education on their initiatives, so that the work that we do is coherent, it is well-grounded in evidence, and it is also eminently practical for practitioners across the state. And so this project has been focused on the ELD standards framework, and we've been working very closely with Dr. Coady Axtell and Dr. Sophia Mesevich from the Nevada Department of Education. And they have organized a presenter today, who they will introduce as well, Dr. Diana Walker, who comes to us from the Northwest Regional Professional Development Program, and she will be the main presenter today. So I wanted to go ahead then and turn it over to Sophia, who will set us up for why we're here, why the ELD standards framework is here, and what we will learn today about elementary mathematics. So Sophia?
So thank you, Dr. Chu, and welcome everyone. Wow, this is another important webinar that we are presenting in collaboration with the WestEd Comprehensive Center 15. And really this work grew out of a need, really the cries of educators from across the state to really provide some clarity around the ELD standards framework. And so all of the documents that have been developed in collaboration with experts across our state, we are presenting in webinars. The one thing that we know why we have the ELD standards framework is that we understand across our state that the education of English learners is a shared responsibility by all educators, and that English learners must have access to rigorous standards-based instruction. So next slide, please. So the purpose, as we know, of this webinar, if you can go back one, please, is really a part of a series, as I have said, and it is designed for educators to learn how to use the ELD standards framework to enact best practices for English learners and other diverse learners. And so before we go forward, would like to know who's in the room. So we're going to do a brief poll here. So if you would, please respond to this poll. What is your role in your district or within the state? Boys, glad to see classroom teachers, instructional coaches, EL specialists, district staff, and other specified personnel. So thank you so much for joining us. All right, I think we can close the poll. So right now, what I like to do is to introduce our presenter today. And Dr. Dinah Walker really helped to develop the ELD standards framework. And she'll kind of walk us through lesson planning and the use of the ELD standards framework and really talk to us about how language is integrated in the content. So I'll turn this over to Dr. Walker, and thank you so much for being
Good afternoon, welcome. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a second to say thank you for being here today. Pandemic teaching during a pandemic is incredibly hard. And you guys are here today to talk about math and English language learners after a long day, after all the kids have gone home. And I think that says a lot about your dedication to craft and your dedication to students. And I definitely want to say thank you. Our agenda for today looks like this. We're going to overview the ELD guiding principles so that we can then align them to the instructional sequence we talk about. We'll define quality learning of mathematics and go over the dimensions of that. We'll look at an example lesson sequence, and then we'll apply the ELD standards framework of that lesson sequence. So we'll combine the framework with the example lesson to show how it can be used. And then there will be time for questions and answers. On the next slide, what you'll see is a graphic of the ELD standards framework guiding principles. And that's exactly what they are. This is the thinking that framed the framework. As you look at each of these, robust standards-based instruction, extended discourse, metacognitive development, formative assessment practices, what do the students bring to the situation, and that shared responsibility we all have for students? I hope you look at it and go, oh my gosh, I can see the NEPF in there. Because isn't it nice when our evaluation system aligns with our instructional resources? Let's take a closer look at these guiding principles in the next slide. The first three guiding principles are here. I want to give you a chance to look at them. One of the assumptions of the guiding principle is that students come with assets. They come with gifts, they come with skills, they come with prior experiences that we can leverage and use and build on. Guiding principle 2, we're looking at that both ethical and legal responsibility to provide access to our English language learners to that grade level, robust, standards-based instruction. And we know we have to have appropriate scaffolding to get them there. Guiding principle 3 focuses on extended discourse. It's the pathway to get us to that standards aligned grade level instruction. Today, we'll really focus on guiding principle 3. So as we go through, making connections back to that extended discourse through multiple modalities. The final two guiding principles are on the next slide. And they are the the metacognition of students, and a focus on formative assessment practice. They are equally as important as the first three, but we are going to go over them because our focus today is more around three. On the next slide, we're looking at what is quality learning of mathematics, and looking at it from three dimensions. That first dimension, the conceptual dimension, it's the moving beyond procedural math. It's moving into mathematical reasoning so that kids can then transfer their mathematical reasoning across contexts. The next dimension is participation by design. We know that extended interaction deepens understanding of the mathematical concepts and of the mathematical language. The third focus, or the third dimension, is purposeful focus on language. We know that this deepens the cognitive understanding and math skill for students. It provides that pathway for transfer. It provides that pathway for expressing the metacognition about math. In addition to that, for our English language learners, it also provides this pathway from the math knowledge they already have in their minds in their native language. It provides that pathway so that they can then express it in their target language. For us, that's usually English. Okay. So quality learning of mathematics has all three of these dimensions for all students. That purposeful focus on language provides additional pathways for English language learners. On the next slide, we'll look at an overview process for lesson planning. All of us have our own ways to lesson plan, right? We all have our own formats. We all have our favorite pens that we use. But for all of us, we have this process. And in that process, we're thinking of the big picture. We're looking at it. We're looking for the key mathematical concepts. We're looking for the necessary mathematical practices that are required for the lesson. We're picking out those key mathematical concepts. We're thinking about the mathematical prior knowledge kids need or can bring to this lesson. We're also thinking about what lived experience students can bring to this lesson to help them access it. And then in that outline, that planning process, we're also creating extension activities so that students can apply their understanding in a new context. For me, I'm also hoping and pulling on my peers. I mean, in any lesson planning situation, I'm the language person. That's what I bring to the table. I'm going to get help from the math expert. I'm going to get help from my colleague who knows more than I do about something. And what you will see in the next lesson sequence really is a collaboration between the people who deeply know the math and the people who bring the language component. On the next slide, we go from that big overview picture to really thinking about, first of all, is the lesson that I'm thinking about doing, does it have that logical thread that I can pull through? And I'm also thinking about how am I giving access to most of my students with this lesson progression? Because the thing is if my lesson design has access for most of my students as part of the design, I am creating space and time for students who need more. Okay, so big overview of the lesson and then thinking through, is it logical and how am I providing access? So let's take a look in the next slide of the task that we're talking about. This is a 4th grade task. It was pulled from illustrative mathematics. As you can tell, it was written at a time before COVID because people are shaking hands. We will talk about that a little bit more deeply towards the end. What a strength in this particular task is it really provides an opportunity for introducing the concept of combinations. And even beyond that, it's a task that creates context for a universal experience. When we think of English language arts, we talk about a language experience activity, and we use that activity to create common experience that we can then build language on, right? This task has the potential to be the same thing, but the math version. It creates a universal experience. It creates some scaffolding for them to be able to try out combinations. And it creates opportunity for Math Practice 5 using tools appropriately. Okay. So in the next slide, what I want you guys to think about is, what do our English language learners bring to the table around this task? What prior knowledge or prior lived experiences could our ELs bring to this task? If you wouldn't mind to take a minute and post that in the chat. If you need to see where the chat is, it's in the bottom in the middle, and it has the little speech icon above it. Nice, Paula, thank you, absolutely. Various ways of greeting others. Okay, if we move on to the next slide. Oh, Cheryl, thank you, groupings. Catherine, thank you, meeting multiple people in a room. Good, yeah, absolutely. This is all experience that our ELs bring. Our next step is to look at a possible lesson sequence, right? Like there's a lot of great effective ways to put lessons together. This is just one possible one. Good, Jen, thank you so much for adding. Good, Tanya, they bring their ways of interacting with others. You got it, that's exactly it. This is what our students can bring to this task. So in this lesson sequence, we'll start with the activating prior knowledge that we can see on the next page, or on the next slide, sorry. I show my age sometimes with the words I use. Think, Pair, Share is a fantastic strategy for activating prior knowledge. It's a quick in, it's something that they can be taught and can be used in multiple contexts. So high leverage strategy. Think, Pair, Share, the first part is the think about the prompt. They can write if they want to. The 10 to 15 seconds that we spend at the think part is essential, right? It allows the quick responders to deepen their thinking, to deepen their answer. It allows our kiddos who need extra processing time, that extra processing time. And it allows our ELs who might be flipping back and forth in multiple languages to do that. Then there's the pair. So with a partner, they exchange ideas. And then finally, the share. Another lovely thing about this particular strategy is we have choices in the share. If I want to know what certain kids are thinking, I can have them report out their own thinking, right? But if I want them practicing their listening skills, if I want them practicing their paraphrasing skills, what I can do is have them share out what their partner said, okay? So the first in this lesson sequence will be a think, pair, share. If we can look at the next slide, we can see the prompt. So this prompt, I want to engage them, right? They get to make a choice. There are 4 pieces of fruit. You can choose 2. Which 2 do you choose and why? And what this does is it sets their minds up. It sets their thinking up for choosing combinations from a set in the foreground of their mind. They don't know it yet. They're talking about fruit, right? But it sets their mind up for being able to do that, choosing combinations from a set. In the next slide, or in the next part of the sequence, is a math language routine. I want to take just a minute here and talk about math language routines in general before we talk about the very specific math language routine in this lesson sequence. Math language routines are amazing. They do so many things, the least of which is not support and sense making. The math language routines allow kids to use the language to understand the language better and understand the skills and concepts in math better. They use it to make sense of the math, right? There's optimizing output. As kids go through these routines, they become better at explaining their thinking, whether that be in spoken form or written form. Math language routines cultivate conversations. What that means is that in the conversations. During the conversations, they have an opportunity to fill in some knowledge gaps. They have opportunities to make mistakes and then have those mistakes corrected within the group so they can make mistakes in a safe environment. And then before they have to share it out or before it goes anywhere else, they've got it corrected. It also maximizes meta awareness. It helps kids organize their thoughts, and they can then apply these routines across contexts. So math, language routines in the general, and the next slide we'll look at the very specific one for this lesson sequence. I call it reading and understanding the problem mathematics protocol because that's how it came to me. The source on this is Understanding Language from ELL Stanford. It's also known as the 3 reads protocol. And the more I say reading and understanding the problem mathematics protocol, the more I'm liking the 3 reads protocol as a name. I am curious if you guys wouldn't mind, while I kind of talk through a couple of things about this protocol, will you put in the chat, have you used this math language routine, either as the 3 reads or as reading and understanding the problem mathematics protocol? Just to get a good idea of who has used it and who hasn't. Thank you so much for putting that in the chat. So some thinking around this. The first thing is this will not be the first time the students have seen this protocol, okay? I'm also thinking about making my partners deliberate. I'm partnering up based on math knowledge and skill. I'm partnering based on native language commonalities. I'm partnering on level of English proficiency. Okay, so I have to be very deliberate in my partnering with this. This protocol will promote independence. Okay, so I'm looking at the chat, and it's nice. This is fantastic. This is new for a lot of you. A few of you have used parts and components of it. This is great. So I'll briefly talk through how it would be used in this lesson sequence. So step 1, they read the problem out loud to a peer. They try to answer the question, what's the problem about? They read it again. And I'm telling them, partner 1, partner 2, that I'm teaching them prior to this point in time how to do these steps, right? But step 2, they read it again, and then they talk about what is the question and the problem. In the next slide, there's step 3. So this is the 3rd time they're reading the problem, and this is really when they're figuring out how they can solve the problem. They talk about the information they need to solve it, the information they have, and then the information that is missing. The next step, step 3A, is something that I added for this particular task and to focus on math practice 5. In step 3A, they're going to talk about what tools they could use to solve the problem, and then they're going to talk about what they're going to try to do first. Okay. So this is a change. This is an adjustment for this specific task. That is the great thing about math language routines, right? We can tweak them just a little bit to match the specific needs of what we're doing right now. In the next slide, we look at the 4th step, and this is when they're actually going through the process of solving the problem. Because the protocol has created the opportunity for independence, it's created time and space for me as the teacher to do some small group work. I can have a small group of kiddos, I can make sure that they understand the problem and then send them off to solve the problem. I can walk around, I can coach in, I can do some verbal scaffolding. So it creates that time and space to support kids who might need more. The next step in the lesson sequence is to go to a think, pair, share, squared. So what they're doing is they're taking what they did with their partner and then they're sharing it with another set of partners. So we are extending the discourse, we're extending the metacognition, we're extending their knowledge because they might be exposed to a different way to solve the problem. And we're also giving them additional practice time. The next step in the lesson sequence is a mini lecture. It is very likely that students will solve this task in one of three ways: through a systematic list, drawing a picture, or using manipulatives. In this 8 to 12-minute mini lecture, we're going to overview explicit steps to each of these ways of solving the problem. We're also connecting language to process, and we're adding language to the experience with this particular piece. In the next slide, we're looking at extension. Oh, actually, can we go back, Dana? Thank you. Oftentimes when I think of mini lectures, I think today I want to teach you, but really with this mini lecture, it's how did you solve the problem? And then to overview the three ways as the overarching question for this mini lecture. Now on the next slide, we're looking at extension. Same task, but instead of two people greeting each other, what happens if groups of three greet each other or groups of four greet each other? Dr. Chu has this great visual of three people shaking hands like this that is funny and kids will love it, but it also makes it clear for kids what they're to do. I also have choices around supports in this extension piece, because I can have a group of students do the 3 reads protocol again. I can let groups of students have open conversation because they're ready for that. I can keep a small group with me. I can change partnerships to change levels of support as well with this extension piece. Okay, so that is the lesson sequence. In the next slide, we're going to look back at the activities and the purpose for the activities. So when we think about the think, pair, share, it really sets up their thinking for combinations. When we are thinking about the reading and understanding the problem protocol, or how they're independently determine what the problem is asking and planning ways to solve it, we're supporting sense making. And think, pair, share squared, we're exposing them to multiple tools and multiple ways to solve the problem. We're also extending discourse. In the mini lecture, we're providing the language for the 3 strategies for solving the problem, and we're also providing language, adding language to the experience. So in the next slide, it's a question for you. Looking back at those activities, will you select one, make a connection to guiding principle 3, and it's right here if you would like to read it. And then please share your thoughts in the chat. What connections are you making between the activities in the lesson sequence and guiding principle 3?
So Diana, do we want to go back to the slide where all of the activities are listed? I'll just take another glimpse at that again.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Around extended discourse.
Okay.
Connections. Thank you.
Good. Hey, Catherine, thank you for mentioning visual discourse. That's fantastic. That's a nice thing. When we think about dual coding, right, and there's more space in that short-term memory when we've got oral and visual discourse, nice. Multiple partner interactions. Thank you, Tanya. Paula, thank you. Pointing out that extended discourse. I agree, Christine. Frequent opportunities for that. Okay. Thank you guys so much for your reflections in the chat. There's patterns around people noticing the multiple opportunities to engage in speaking and listening with the switching up of partners and that share, think, pair, share, square. Okay, now we're moving from an overview of the lesson sequence, and we will move into the ELD standards framework. Thank you, Colleen. It's very interesting. Wait time and think time is different online, right? It took us about between 15 and 20 seconds to give everyone enough time to both think and start responding in the chat. And that is one thing that I am, even after a year, I'm still getting used to. Okay, so now we're into the framework. The framework is comprehensive for the content areas of English language arts, social studies, math, and science. That is pretty exciting. That is pretty huge and comprehensive to have all 4 content areas there. What we're going to do in the next slides is we're going to do an overview of the framework, and then we're going to make connections. We are using the ELD standards framework for developing the language of math, grades 4 and 5. It was a 4th grade task, so it makes sense that we have chosen this one. The next slide shows us the structure of the framework. There are 3 sections. And section 1 is an overview. Section 2 focuses on supports for EL specific to math in general. And section 3 is specific to the mathematical practices. Okay. So that is the overall structure. In the next slide, we see that the framework is broken up into student moves and teacher moves. I love this part. I love this part. I love this part. What are students doing? What language are they using to access, process, and show what they know? What are we as teachers doing so that we can support access, so that we can support processing? The framework uses the word producing, but I think of it, I automatically change it into my mind into how do they show what they know? Okay. So let's look at each one of these, 2A, 2B, and 2C. In 2A, these are student moves, and here we're really focused on the receptive, right? The listening and the reading, which means we're really focused on access. How are students accessing the content, the mathematical practices that we want them to? In the districts that I work in, 4th grade English language learners are typically at levels 3 and 4, right? There may be some newcomers at levels 1 and 2. There may be some students who are at levels 5 and 6, but most of them levels 3 and 4. So we're going to start with this middle column. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to think back about that lesson sequence. I'm going to look at this middle column and I'm going to see where there's a match. What does our lesson have? So if I'm looking at that middle column and I go to the bolded word discriminate, and it says discriminate between different meanings of language, general and specific technical language associated with content and oral discourse. Yes, we've got that in our lesson. Okay. If I move to the right, apply tech, and I'm looking at apply, and it says apply technical language related to content grade level oral scenarios. I'm pushing that way, right? I'm pushing into levels 5 and 6 for sure. But if I'm moving all the way left and I'm looking at levels 1 and 2, what I'm realizing is I don't actually have a lot there and for my ELs at levels 1 and 2. Let's see what happens when we move to the next slide. Now these are student moves for production, for speaking and writing, right? So really we've moved from access to processing and producing. And I'm going to look at the middle again, and I'm looking at where it's describe bolded, describe how reasons support this specific approach or strategy in a math scenario. Yes, nailed it. It is there. Okay, now let me go and I'll look at ask. Ask and answer relevant questions and add relevant information with reasoning. That is there in our lesson sequence. Let's move right and see where we're addressing levels 5 and 6. We have use a variety of words and phrases, connect ideas and reasoning. Yes, that's there. Use a wide variety of general academic and content specific words. That's there. We're definitely pushing in that direction. Now, if I go all the way left and I'm going back to my levels 1 or 2, again, I'm seeing not so much. Okay. Let's go to 2C on the next slide and see what we have there. Oh. Nope, sorry, let's go to 2B and see what we have there. These are the teacher moves. Now we're thinking about what are we doing as teachers. Okay, I'm looking at the middle, build background, model, provide explicit instruction, provide a system for students to record and process key academic content, vocabulary, check for comprehension. But I could easily add that, require full sentence. Oh my gosh, you guys, there's so much in here that we are meeting the needs of our levels 3 and 4. Okay, let's move right. Let's look at levels 5 and 6. We are pushing towards some of this, right? We did some background building of key concepts. We're pushing them towards some using complex sentence. Don't have any discourse starters, but we definitely modeled the oral academic language. Okay, so we're going to pause right here. It's important in all times to celebrate the small things, right? It is especially important now. And so when we've got it, we're going to celebrate it. So we're celebrating a little bit. Now we're going to move left. And I'm looking at that levels 1 and 2 again. Okay, I see some modeling here. And I'm seeing some explicit instruction and practice here. I don't know if I'm seeing enough here for my levels 1 and 2. Let's look at the next slide. It's 2C. Looking at the middle again. Another mini celebration. We have hit them, right? We've used engaged pair work. We've done small group work. There's structured discussion. There's repeated and expanded discussion. We didn't use dialogue structures. Interesting. Okay, now let's move to the right to the bridging 5 and 6. Oh my gosh, okay, we hit that as well. Same strategies, met the needs of levels 3 through 6. Nice when that happens. We're going to move left. We're going to look at levels 1 and 2. We do have strategic partnering and we do have strategic small group. Okay, so we've addressed the needs of levels 1 and 2 with those two strategies. I want to make a note here that strategic partnering and strategic small group is one of those things that when done with proficiency level in mind, works across levels of English proficiency. Okay, let's look at our next slide and let's look back for moves. Here are the activities, here are the teacher moves, and here are the student moves that happened in each one of those. And I'm going to pause and give you a chance to look at that for a minute. As I'm reflecting on the lesson sequence, how the lesson is laid out, there's solid supports for levels 3+ in this lesson. You know, thinking about scaffolds for most of my kids pulled that in. But when I look at levels 1 and 2, there's a couple of teachers' moves, but I think I need to go back and look at this lesson if I have students with proficiency level 1 and 2 in my classroom for more supports. The next slide, the next couple of slides, we're going to look at a couple of ways to do that. It's not comprehensive or complete, right? This is just thinking around that question of what changes can I make to include my levels 1 and 2 more. So when I was putting this slide together, the activating prior knowledge slide, one of the things that became very clear to me is I do not know about fruit worldwide. I only know the fruit that I know. The other thing that became very clear to me is it would make no sense to just put up random pieces of fruit that I found in the world that I thought were interesting. Like, this really is an opportunity to reflect the students in my classroom. I have an opportunity to include the fruit that they see every day, the specific fruit from specific cultures. I have an opportunity to have a conversation with some of my English language learners to ask them what their favorite fruit is, right? Like, this active writing prior knowledge slide has the potential to reflect the students in my class if I take the time to figure out what that looks like. On the next slide, the grammatical structure of the task is difficult. It's an if structure, right? And there's always this good tension when we come across things that are complex, right? Because the end goal is students are able to figure out what a problem is asking, no matter how complexly it's written. So if this is a structure I'm teaching during my ELA block, I'm probably not making any changes, right? I'm going to push them into that difficulty and have them work through it. Okay. But if I have levels 1 and 2, or if this is not a structure that they're ready for in English language arts, I may consider reworking the problem, making it more grammatically simple. There are 9 people in a room. They greet each other. How many greetings are made? I might consider making this change in the time of COVID anyway. But that act of changing from handshake to greet is also a way to recognize the diverse ways that greetings happen in different cultures. So I have a choice as a teacher about when to change the lexical complexity and when to change to make it more reflective of the students in my room. And depending on my goals, the greater context, um, I can make those changes. I didn't change the math at all. I changed the way the problem was worded to better reflect the needs and to better reflect the students in the room. Okay, so those are just 2 small ways that changes could be made to be more inclusive to the levels 1 and 2 in a room. On the next slide, if you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat, how does the sequence of activities above provide English learners with opportunities to engage in using appropriate tools strategically? This is math practice 5, right? So in that sequence of activities, where are the opportunities for them to engage in using appropriate tools strategically? And again, we're going to go for that 15 seconds of wait time to give you a chance to think through it. Whenever you're ready, go ahead and put it in the chat. Cheryl, nice. Yeah, absolutely. When they were choosing the tools is a great part for that. Christine, thank you several times. They can use the tools when they are talking. They can use it to model. Nice. Oh, Jen, I love what you said. Slow roll that builds. Can you tell us a little bit more of that thinking, please? Good, Christelle, absolutely. Right, it's a launching place for discourse. They can do it and they don't have to be shy about participating. Nice. Good, Catherine, thank you. Good, Tanya, right. The sequence allows them to talk about those tools. Thank you for clarifying, Jen. Progressive nature of understanding the world's good. Good, thank you guys so much for responding in the chat. It is like, the chats really are quite lovely in terms of them being a space for everyone to share. Okay, so let's go into section 3 of the document. Let's look for the teacher moves and the success criteria for math practice 5. We're going to do it through the same process. We're going to start in the middle and then we'll move right and then we'll move left and we'll see where this particular lesson sequence addresses those needs. So if we're looking in the middle, yes, there was a task provided that students can use to illustrate and to explain their understanding. They were creating models, absolutely. What I notice here is there wasn't that very specific sentence starter linguistic support. If I move to the right, it's the same, right? That the task allowed them to illustrate and explain their understanding. They were able to model. In that think, pair, share, square, they likely went to clarifying, but they could have gotten to agree or disagree, but I didn't put that support explicitly in place. So yeah, kind of, right? There's no talk support. And I move left. And again, so the scaffolded task, the model, the opportunities for small group met some of those needs, but I'm not sure that it was enough. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide and look at success criteria. Okay, students will orally explain and produce a graphic. Yes, we got it. The pair, share, square. They got it with the math language routine. If we move right, there's bridging and reaching. Okay, we're pushing there, right? Because they have to explain. They might do some justifying and defending. Again, I don't have that explicit expectation around using specific and technical academic vocabulary. I think we're still pushing there, might be a tweak up, right? And when I move left, okay, so they will solve a problem, they'll have some academic vocabulary, and they'll describe their steps. So it's there. My question is it supported enough? So if we look at the next slide, this dialogue guide is so cool. I love this dialogue guide and I love the structure of it. And this is why. The right column, we have the what can you say, right? We have the language frames, language stems that we are so good at providing our kids. Like this is a strategy that we all commonly use. But this left column of what you can do is the piece that I am so stinking excited about. It's because we're giving kids a choice, right? We're having them decide the thinking, the task that they want to do. Are they selecting a tool? Are they checking their results? Are they identifying how tools are strong or weak? So this dialogue guide goes with Math Practice 5. And it provides choice. Kids have to think through, what am I trying to do? And then look at the language support. And then they can make decisions around what language support that they need. It puts it increases metacognition because it puts the onus on them to think through what they want to do and then attach the language to that. I love this structure, this format for dialogue guides or for sentence frame, sentence starter supports. As we were going through this process, some of you may have said, oh my gosh, this is also Math Practice 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them, especially with a math language routine. And absolutely, right? Any given math task will have multiple math practices that can go with it. Just out of respect for everybody's time, we chose to focus on Math Practice 5. Okay, it is time for us to move into questions and wrap up. Feel free to put any questions in the chat. Dana, are people able to unmute to ask questions if they would like in this format?
It's currently not set that way. We're just going
Okay.
with chat.
Okay, thank you. Thank you guys so much for being with us today. We will be around if you if you would like to go. If you got what you needed, you are welcome to go. If you would like to leave comments or questions in the chat box, we will be around for a while.
So we have our contact information up. For those of you who would like to reach out to us, I'm Sophia Masevich. I'm with the Nevada Department of Education, and my colleague Kawadi Axtell. Also, we are the designated administrators for Title III and for Zoom and migrant education. We like to remind everyone, hey, this is an ongoing series. Our next webinar will be March 23rd, and it will be on the ELD standards framework in elementary ELA. And we have some great presenters, co-presenters for that particular webinar. So please join us. And lastly, I believe we have a survey. And Dr. Chu, that you want to take over from there, and thank you everyone for coming.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to thank everyone for attending, and I especially wanted to thank Dr. Diana Walker for being our presenter today. And we would love to have that feedback on today's presentation in the survey link that was just posted. These webinars are being uploaded after they are broadcast. I believe NDE has a YouTube channel, which is where I think they are going to live. We'll follow up with the participants today with that info after it's up.
And for those of you who possibly attended the 2 math webinars, one for secondary, one for elementary, we will be sending out those PowerPoints to those participants that joined. So thank you again, Dr. Walker. As always, super terrific, amazing.
And actually, Dana, if we could advance the slide to the disclaimer, just so that, okay.